The second proposal, this reparation loan, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but
Yeah.
it doesn't need consensus. In other words, it can be passed by qualified majority voting, which means
Okay.
the big countries can probably press it down Belgium's throat.
The war in Ukraine is in stalemate. The peace talks are going nowhere. Can Ukraine's European allies do anything to shift the conflict in Ukraine's favour? One possibility is to loan Ukraine 90 billion euros of Russian money that sits in banks in Belgium. The European Commission wants to make that happen, but Belgium is currently vetoing the plan. Can the EU sort this out? Steve Erlanger is the New York Times chief diplomatic correspondent in Europe, and he joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
When we talk about this money that is held in Belgium, the frozen Russian assets, what exactly are we discussing?
Well, this is about 220 billion euros of Russian investments, really, in bonds and different kinds of securities, which over time have matured. And Belgium has a company called Euroclear, which holds this money. And since the assets are frozen, Russia can't get the money out. So the money is basically the product of these investments. They're not the investments per se themselves, so that the European Union wants to use this cash, this profits, essentially to loan to Ukraine as collateral, basically, and in the hope one day, which is unlikely, that Russia will pay reparations back to Ukraine. The dilemma is, since the Americans aren't funding Ukraine anymore, Russia is still pursuing its war. Ukraine needs about 100 billion a year in both fiscal and military aid, and the Europeans are trying to come up with it. The usual problem with the European Union is everyone who's a small country will say, or a country with a lot of debt, will say, oh, well, let's have Eurobonds, let's have collective debt. But countries like Germany, the Netherlands, the Danes don't want to be on the hook for collective debt, so they say no. So they're trying to figure out a way to use this money held by Belgium to create what they call a reparation loan, which would create about 90 billion euros, which is roughly 2/3, they claim, of what Ukraine will need over the next 2 years to show, one, that Europe's serious, to show Russia that the war can continue, to show Ukraine that it still has support, and to show the Americans that they're not going to be pushed around.
And how have they managed to get around the issue that Belgium has? Because I think the fear in Belgium, in the administration there, is that if the sanctions were lifted on Russia and this money had been given to Ukraine, that Belgium would be liable to repay it in some way. How have they managed to get around that?
Well, they're trying to do that. I mean, Belgium is not yet convinced, but the proposal made yesterday, which is like the second effort, says to the Belgians, we will be there, you will not be alone, we don't think this is going to happen. But to be honest, most finance ministers think it's a bad idea. The European Central Bank thinks it's a bad idea. They think it could damage the credibility of the entire euro currency and Europe's credibility as a sort of lender that is solid. So it is a big debate. I think they can satisfy the Belgians, but the second proposal, this reparation loan, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but
Yeah.
it doesn't need consensus. In other words, it can be passed by qualified majority voting, which means the big countries can probably press it down Belgium's throat.
Which, yeah, I mean, may not be palatable for Belgium, but I'm sure is what Ukraine wants. And we heard yesterday from a Ukrainian voice, Yuri Sak, on our programme, who said essentially this issue of the money has become a real problem, and relations between the two sides, Ukraine and European leaders, are being sort of tainted in a way by this issue.
Yes, and sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
No, I was just going to say it also becomes an issue with this weird Witkov-Dmitriev plan, because the Russians have kind of held out the use of these assets as a way to make money with the Americans. cutting out the Europeans. So this is one more effort, too, by the Europeans to say, hey, you know, the money is sitting with us, and we have to be part of all of this discussion.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting power play there. I was just going to ask you finally, I mean, obviously the European leaders are determined to show that they are still supportive of Ukraine. But another of the key stumbling blocks is the fact that they're still buying Russian energy reserves. Is there any move to completely end that reliance?
Well, there is. I mean, part of the problem is Hungary has a direct pipeline, Slovakia also, but they have committed to completely ending. I mean, most of it's not, I mean, very few countries take Russian gas now.
Well,
And they
not
have
direct,
reduced.
but they take it from refined from India, don't they? They take.
Well, yeah, I mean, once oil is refined, it has no nationality. It's sort of fungible. That's always been the problem. But officially, at least, they say they're going to take no more Russian oil and gas by the end of 2027. It's not a great big amount right now, but it is embarrassing politically, just as you've pointed out.
Yeah. Always great to have you. Thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate
Thank
your time.
you.
Today we are proposing to cover 2/3 of Ukraine's financing needs for the next 2 years. So this is 90 billion euros. The remainder would be for international partners to cover. And we have taken almost all of them into account in our proposal that is today on the table of the reparations loans. We have very strong safeguards in place to protect member states and to reduce the risks as much as possible. We all know that we can never match the sacrifice of the Ukrainian people, but what we can match is their stamina, their resolve, their staying power, and we can equip them with the means to defend themselves and to lead peace negotiations from a position of strength. And since pressure is the only language the Kremlin responds to, we can also dial it up. We have to increase the costs of war for Putin's aggression, and today's proposal gives us the means to do this. We want peace, and no one wants more peace than Ukraine. Therefore, today we're sending a very strong signal to the Ukrainian people that we are in for the long haul. We can equip them with the means to defend themselves and, even more important, with the means to lead peace negotiations from a position of strength.